أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. أستغفر الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الحي القيوم الرحمن الرحيم ذو الجلال والإكرام، وأتوب إليه من جميع ظلمي وجرمي وإسرافي على نفسي، وأتوب إليه. يا دائم الفضل على البرية، يا باسط اليدين بالعطية، يا صاحب المواهب الصنية، صل على محمد وآله خير الورى سجية، واغفر لنا يا ذا العلا في هذه العشية. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أسألك برحمتك التي وسعت كل شيء، وبقوتك التي قهرت بها كل شيء، وخضع لها كل شيء، وذل لها كل شيء، وبجبروتك التي قلبت بها كل شيء، وبعزتك التي لا يقوم لها شيء، وبعظمتك التي ملأت كل شيء، وبسلطانك الذي على كل شيء، وبوجهك الباقي بعد فناء كل شيء، وبأسمائك التي ملأت أركان كل شيء، وبعلمك الذي أحاط بكل شيء، وبنور وجهك الذي أضاء له كل شيء. يا نور يا قدوس، يا نور يا قدوس، يا نور يا قدوس، يا أول الأولين ويا آخر الآخرين. اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تهدك الإثم، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل اللقاء، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تغير النعم، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تحبس الدعاء، اللهم اغفر لي الذنوب التي تنزل البلاء، اللهم اغفر لي كل ذنب أذنبت وكل خطيئة أخطأتها. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك بذكرك، واستشفع بك إلى نفسي، وأسألك بجودك أن تدنيني من قربك، وأن توزعني شكرك، وأن تلهمني ذكرك. اللهم إني أسألك سؤال خاضع متذلل خاشع، أن تسامحني وترحمني وتجعلني بقسمك راضيا قانعا، وفي جميع الأحوال متواضعا. اللهم وأسألك سؤال من اشتدت فاقته وأنزل بك عند الشدائد حاجته، وعظم فيما عندك رغبته. اللهم أظم سلطانه وعلى مكانه، وخفي مكروه وظهر وغلب قهره وجرى قدرته ولا يمكن الفرار من حكومته. اللهم لا أجد لذنوبي غافرا ولا لقبائه ساترا ولا لشيء من عملها الغبي بالحسن مبدلا غيره. لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك وبحمدك ظلمت نفسي وتجرأت بجهلي وسكنت إلى قديم ذكرك لي ومنك علي. اللهم مولاي كم من غبيه سترته وكم من فاده من البلاء أغلته وكم من إثار وغيته وكم من مكروه دفعته وكم من ثناء جميل لست أهلا له نشرته. اللهم أضم بلائي وأفرت بي سوء حالي وغصرت بي أعمالي وغعدت بي أغلالي وحبسني عن نفعي بعد أملي وخدعتني الدنيا بغرورها ونفسي بجنايتها ومثالي يا سيدي وأسألك بعزتك أن لا يحجب عنك دعائي سوء عملي وفعالي ولا تفضحني بخفي ما اطلعت عليه من سري ولا تعاجلني بالعقوبة على ما عملت في خلواتي من سوء فعلي وإساءتي ودبام تفريطي وجهالتي وكثرة شهواتي وغفلتي. وكن اللهم بعزتك لي في كل الأحوال رؤوفا وعلي في جميع الأمور عطوفا. إلهي وربي من لي غيرك أسأل كشف ضري والنذر في أمري. إلهي ومولاي أجريت علي حكما اتبعت فيه هوى نفسي ولم أهترز فيه من تزيين عدوي فغرني بما أهوى وأسعده على ذلك القضاء فتجاوزت بما جرى علي من ذلك بعد حدودي وخالفت بعد أوامري فلك الحمد علي في جميع ذلك ولا حجة لي فيما جرى علي فيه قضاء وألزمني حكمك وبلاء. وقد أتيتك يا إلهي بعد تقصيري وإسرافي على نفسي معتذرا نادما منكسرا مستغيلا مستغفرا منيبا مغرا مذعنا معترفا لا أجد مفرا مما كان مني ولا مفزعا أتوجه إليه في أمري غير قبولك عذري وإدخالك إياي في سعة رحمتك. اللهم فاقبل عذري وارحم شدة ضري وفكني من شد وثاقي. يا رب ارحم ضعف بدني ورقة جلدي ودقة عظمي. يا من بدأ خلقي وذكري وتربيتي وبري وتغذيتي، هبني لابتداء كرمه وسالف برك بي. يا إلهي وسيدي وربي، أتراك معذبي بنارك بعد توحيدي وبعد ما انتبى عليه قلبي من معرفته ولإجابه لساني من ذكره واعتقده ضميري من حبه، وبعد صدق اعترافي ودعائي خاضعا لربوبيته. هيات أنت أكرم من أن تضيع من ربيت أو تبعد من أدنيت أو تشرد من آويت أو تسلم إلى البلاء من كفيته ورحمت. وليت شعري يا سيدي وإلهي ومولاي، أتسلط النار على وجوه خرت لعظمتك ساجدا، وعلى ألسن لتغى بتوحيدك صادقا وبشكرك مادحا، وعلى قلوب اعترفت بإلهيتك محققا، وعلى ضمائر حوت من العين بك حتى صارت خاشعة، وعلى جوارح ست إلى أوطان تعبدك تائئة، وأشارت باستغفارك مذعنة. ما هكذا الظن به ولا أخبرنا بفضلك عنه. يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب، يا كريم يا رب. وأنت تعلم وعفي عن قليل من بلاء الدنيا وعقوباتها وما يجري فيها من المكاره على أهلها، ألا أن ذلك بلاء ومكروه قليل مكثو، يسير بقاء قصير مدته. فكيف احتمالي لبلاء الآخرة وجليل وقوع المكاره فيها وهو بلاء تطول مدته ويدوم مقامه ولا يخفف عن أهله، لأنه لا يكون إلا عن غضبك وانتقامك وسخطك، وهذا ما لا تقوم له السماوات والأرض. يا سيدي فكيف لي وأنا عبدك الضعيف ذليل الحقير المسكين المستكين. يا إلهي وربي وسيدي ومولاي، لأي الأمور إليك أشكو ولما منها أضج وأبكي، لأليم العذاب وشدته أملة للبلاء ومدته. فلئن صيرتني للعقوبات مع أعدائي وجمعت بيني وبين أهل بلائي وفرقت بيني وبين أحبائك وأوليائي، فهبني يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي وربي صبرت على أضابه فكيف أصبر على فراغه وأبني صبرت على هر ناره فكيف أصبر عن النظر إلى كرامته أم كيف أسكن في النار ورجائي عفو فبعزتك يا سيدي ومولاي أقسم صادقا لئن تركتني ناطقا لأضجن إليك بين أهلها ضجيج الآملين ولأصرخن إليك صراخ المستصرخين ولأبكين عليك بكاء الفاقدين ولأنادينك أين كنت يا ولي المؤمنين يا غاية آمال العارفين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا غياث المستغيثين يا حبيب قلوب الصادقين ويا إله العالمين أفتراك سبحانك يا إلهي وبحمدك تسمع فيها صوت عبد مسلم سجن فيها بمخالفته وضاغت أذابها بمعصيته وأبس بين أتباعها بجرمه وجريرته وهو يضج إليك ضجيج مؤمل لرحمته ويناديك بلسان أهل توحيده ويتوسل إليك بربوبيته يا مولاي فكيف يبقى في العذاب وهو يرجو ما سلف من حلمه أم كيف تؤلمه الله وهو يأمل فضلك ورحمتك أم كيف يحرقه لهيبها وأنت تسمع صوته وترى مكانه أم كيف يشتمل عليه زفيرا وأنت تعلم ضعفه أم كيف يتغلغل بين أتباعها وأنت تعلم صدقها أم كيف تزجره زبانيتها وهو يناديك يا رب أم كيف يرجو فضلك في إتقه منها وتترك فيها هيهات هيهات ما ذلك الذنب ولا المعروف من فضلك ولا مشبه لما عاملت به الموحدين من برك وإحسانك فباليقين أغتأ لولا ما حكمت به من تعذيب جاحدي وقضيت به من إخلاد معاندي لجعلت النار كلها بردا وسلاما وما كان لأحد فيها مقرا ولا مقاما لكنك تقدست أسماء أقسمت أن تملأها من الكافرين من الجنة والناس أجمعين وأن تخلد فيها المعاندين وأن تجل ثناء قلت مبتدئا وتتولت بالعنعام متكرما أفمن كان مؤمنا كمن كان فاسقا لا يستعون. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. Like the time that we always together, we do the Dua Kumail at Saba. At this point, I remind everyone to remembered those who used to be with us, used to sit with us, especially in Saba, and your loved ones, and inshallah, all would benefit from this dua, especially those who sponsors the program. Inshallah, everyone would benefit. And التواصل دعاء نسألكم الدعاء. إلهي وسيدي فأسألك بالقدرة التي قدرتها وبالقضية التي حتمتها وحكمتها وقلبت من عليه أجريتها أن تاب لي في هذه الليلة وفي هذه الساعة كل جرم أجرمته وكل ذنب أذنبته وكل قبيح أسررته وكل جهل أملته كتمته أو أعلنته أخفيته أو أظهرته وكل سيئة أمرت بإثبات الكرام الكاتبين الذين وكلتهم بحفظ ما يكون مني وجعلتهم شهودا علي مع جوارحي وكنت أنت الرقيب علي من ورائه والشاهد لما خفي عنه وبرحمتك أخفيت وبفضلك سترت وأن توفر حظي من كل خير أنزلت أو إحسان فضلت أو بر نشرت أو رزق بسدت أو ذنب تغفر أو خطأ تستر يا رب 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 يا إلهي وسيدي ومولاي ومالك رقي يا من بيده ناصيتي يا عليما بضري ومسكنتي يا خبيرا بفقري وفاقتي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب أسألك بحقك وقدسك وأعظم صفاتك وأسمائك أن تجعل أوقاتي من الليل والنهار بذكرك معمورة وبخدمتك موصولة وأعمالي عندك مقبولة حتى تكون أعمالي وأورادي كلها وردا واحدا وحالي في خدمتك سرمدا يا سيدي يا من عليه مؤولي يا من إليه شكوت أحوالي يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب يا ربي يا ربي يا رب قف على خدمتك جوارحي واشدد على العزيمة جوانحي وهب لي الجد في خشيتك والدوام في الاتصال بخدمتك حتى أسرح إليك في ميادين السابقين وأسرع إليك في البارزين واشتاق إلى قربك في المشتاقين وأذنب منك ذنوب المخلصين وأخافك مخافة المؤمنين واجتمع في جوارك مع المؤمنين. اللهم ومن أرادني بسوء فأرد ومن كادني فكد واجعل لي من أحسن عبيدك نصيبا عندك وأقربهم منزلة مني وأخصم زلفة لدي فإنه لا ينال ذلك إلا بفضلك وجد لي بجودك وعتف علي بمجدك واحفظني برحمتك واجعل لساني بذكرك لهجا وقلبي بحبك متيما إن شاء الله. ومن علي بحسن إجابتك وأقلني عثرتي واغفر زلتي فإنك قضيت على عبادك بعبادتك وأمرتهم بدعائك وضمنت لهم الإجابة. فإليك يا رب نصبت وجهي وإليك يا رب مددت يدي فبعزتك استجب لي دعائي وبلغني مناي ولا تغتى من فضلك رجائي واكفني شر الجن والإنس من أعدائي يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا يا سريع الرضا. اغفر لمن لا يملك إلا الدعاء فإنك فعال لما تشاء يا من اسمه دواء وذكره شفاء وطاعته قناة. ارحم من رأس ماله الرجاء وسلاهه البكاء يا سابق النعم يا دافع النقم يا نور المستوحشين في الظلام يا عالما لا يعلم. صل على محمد وآل محمد وافعل بي ما أنت أهله. وصلى الله على رسوله والأئمة الميامين من آله وسلم تسليما كثيرا كثيرا. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. تماس الدعاء نسألكم الدعاء.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Am I starting? Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والحمد والثناء لرب العالمين وأفضل الصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب قلوبنا وشفيء ذنوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أفضل الصلاة والسلام على نبينا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى أهل بيت الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين، ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين إلى قيام يوم الدين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. In the Holy Quran, we're reminded of the station and role of the Prophet of Allah many times, particularly the verse that reminds those who are believers, making a distinction. Maybe everyone doesn't fit into this category, but those who are the believers or aspiring to be the believers, that we have to be obedient to the Messenger of Allah. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ati'u Allah wa ati'u Rasul wa ulir amr minkum. O you who have faith, obey Allah and obey the Messenger of Allah and those who are charged with authority. Obedience is not something that's reserved for everyone. First and foremost, we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is who we are obedient to ultimately. He's our creator, he's our khaliq, he's the one who knows everything about us, our beginning, our end. He's omniscient. And when he ordained the Prophet of Allah should be obeyed, because the Quran is the book of Allah, and so this is Allah's command, then that carries a lot of weight. That carries a lot of authority. It means that what the Prophet does is an example for us, as we see in other places in the Quran where it refers to the Rasulullah as being uswatun hasana. He's the perfect exemplar for us. The perfect example for us to follow. When we have a perfect example, then that's the blueprint for what Islam should look like in its absolute purest and best form. Allah's rahmah and mercy dictates that although the Quran is this book of perfection, this revelation of perfection, a guidance for us, a guidance for all of humanity. It wasn't like the Quran was revealed, all of a sudden this book drops from the sky, for example, boom, do everything therein. Follow this book, do everything that it says. It was necessary that along with this book of guidance that was revealed piecemeal over this period of time for us, that there had to be a living example, which was a manifestation of that reality of the Quran, a manifestation of that guidance. Sometimes when they talk about bad teachers or educators who don't do a great job, they give the example of an educator who has a book and wants that book to translate into the minds and of the students without giving the examples, without giving the proper explanation, without speaking in the language of the listener, without adding context, or without they themselves being a great example. And so, of course, a lot is lost when that's the case. Rasulullah was perfect in every aspect and facet of his life. And so this is why Allah is commanding. When in the Quran, when there's a command, Allah is trying to emphasize that this is an obligation a lot of times. This is something that is a necessity. It's a mandate. Not listen to Rasulullah if you feel up to it. Listen to what he says and think how, how does that make you feel, and do you agree with it or disagree? It doesn't say that. Be obedient. It's very clear. And so this living example of the manifestation of the Quran, the time in the Muslim Ummah, when they know that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will leave this world, at that time when it was nearing his death, it was difficult, let alone for the Ummah after Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The martyrdom of the Prophet was a major test for all of those who were believers. That Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, which it speaks about in the Quran, this became a test for them. Where are you in respect to this great test? Where now you have to navigate the teachings and follow those teachings of Rasulullah, follow the path that he has set. And as we know, much of the Ummah was not ready to actualize and make that a reality. I want to emphasize and focus on the lessons, some of the lessons that we can learn from the Prophet, some advice that he gave in his last days, and some general lessons that we can learn. Obviously, there's so many, but we want to put into some context with today's discussion, inshallah. Before I do that, I want to draw your attention to a very interesting book. And you may have seen or read this book, but it's the title of the book is The 100 Most Influential Persons in History. Okay? It has some revised editions, but originally written in 1978, revised around 1992. But the number one person in this book of most influential persons in history, I think you can probably guess, is Muhammad Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the messenger and prophet of God. Muhammad ibn Abdullah is considered the most influential human being in all of history. One of the reasons why this particular ranking, I find it interesting in this book, is that the author, Dr. Michael Hart, he's not someone who appears to be sympathetic to Islam per se, or Muslims. He's considered a white separatist. He used to be a researcher and astrophysicist. That was his field of study. And he wrote this particular book, in his opinion, of who are the 100 most influential people in the world, in history. And he got a lot of criticism for that as well. So there were people who came and said, what are you thinking? How did you come up with this idea that Muhammad is going to be number one above all of these people? And, how did you come up with the idea that more than this person, that person, and they named different names? How did you rank him to be number one? And his response to justify was very interesting as well. We oftentimes, as Muslims, undervalue the holistic approach to what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam brought. Meaning that we oftentimes look at a very myopic view of, the messenger of Allah who was just the kind person, the messenger of Allah who was Amin, the messenger of Allah who was the person who revealed the revelation. But if we want to truly understand him, the reason why Allah is saying obey him, follow him, is because it is every aspect of his life is an example for us to follow. You're paying attention? Every aspect. And someone who is from the outside looking in is seeing this. And in his response, Dr. Hart says that he considered the role of the way that the Prophet developed Islam to be more influential than anyone else in history because of his holistic approach. Right? Considered it to be more influential than Prophet Isa or Prophet Musa even. And what he is emphasizing that he saw is that approach that includes Islam in as a way of life. A lot of times the definition of religion is being used in this Western scope of what is religion, which is very, very, very a very limited category. Religion is what you do on Sunday or Saturday or Friday. Religion is a holiday. Religion is just something someone said. Religion is something that's left out of most parts of society. It's very popular, right? A lot of settings. We don't talk about religion. We don't talk about politics. This kind of thing. It's a very common thing in this society, in our society here in America. Actually, it was really interesting to hear. I was once listening to an interview with one of the justices, who this person who has the highest authority of legal ruling and legislation, basically in the land in some capacity, at least in the U.S. System, said that when these justices sit together, they avoid at all costs these topics. Don't talk about religion. Don't talk about even the policy in a lot of contexts, because it doesn't fit into so many different spaces. And what Islam came and what Islam brought, or revived, I should say, because the religion of Islam is a revival of the path of Isa, the path of Jesus, the path of Moses, the path of Abraham, the path of Noah, the path of David, and so on and so forth. It is a continuation of a path. And it being an answer to the various problems in the world today. It being a system that is holistic, that looks at the issues of economy and has answers. It being a system that takes into consideration the changes of society, the evolving nature of humanity and society at large. It takes into consideration the role of government and governance. It takes into consideration interpersonal relationships, ethics, morals, all of these aspects. And by doing so, you have a complete way of life. So religion, in Allah's eyes, is not this thing that, is compartmentalized to be for a weekend, to be for one day of the week, to be for one time of the year. Sometimes people joke about Muharram Muslims, right? Where this time there's that fervor of love of the Ahlul Bayt that arises, or Ramadan Muslims, or this is a time when, reflection and things become manifest importance. But the reality is that this is only a path that is for it is not a path that is limited to that day or that week or that month or the time of the year. It is a continuous path for every day of our life and every aspect of our life. The moment we come to the realization and understand that Islam has a solution and is the solution for all aspects, then and only then are we beginning to really truly be following the path of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this person looks and says that, you know what, the Prophet Muhammad was able to establish not just a following, not just establish some aspects of ibadah and ritual worship. He was able to manifest the reality of community, the reality of what that means, involving both government, involving people, involving economy, involving all these different aspects of life. And that was just Islam. And so the holistic nature of Islam is what this person at least is seeing when they say that they believe that this is the reason why Islam is or why they consider the Prophet Muhammad to be the most influential person, number one in all of history. Now, I like to add a disclaimer to this about this book, and because I find that a lot of times, especially as an American Muslim, I find it almost offensive when Muslims feel the need to justify their beliefs through someone who's not Muslim, as if that gives it, some kind of official, authentic value that as if it didn't have. We should learn to recognize the value of our religion as it is, and not need those references, and only for the adding and contextualizing, the conversation. It's fine, but when it becomes something like, for example, Dr. So and so even mentioned about Imam Ali, and then people need to feel good about themselves because of that. If Oprah talks about Prophet Muhammad, then we'll all be excited. If Joe Biden says something about Muhammad, if Trump did, and we'd be wondering if we should do taqlid to these people. We don't need validation from any person to understand the perfection and the uswa that exists within Islam. If anything, we need to become the living examples by which other people can see Islam when they see us. And to get to here, we have definitely some work still to be done. Let's look at some of the advice of Rasulullah, and I base this advice off of one of our teachers in the Hausa, who is known for his prowess in history and historic accounts. And there's a couple of different areas which are emphasized that the Prophet focused on or mentioned or discussed, and we'll get to, inshallah, a couple of them tonight. One of the things which Rasulullah emphasized was for people to avoid having haqqun nas, the rights of others, upon them, meaning that to avoid doing injustice to others, rather. to avoid any kind of right of someone else which they infringe upon. Now let's put this, make sure we understand this. So we're talking about haqqun nas, the rights of others. This is the way, for example, a mu'min has a right to be safe from the tongue of another mu'min, for example. You as a believer have a right that me or any other believer should not say something that is ill about you or backbite you, for example. This is the right of a mu'min. The right of parents is that their children should speak to them and interact with them with humility and kindness. The right of a wife is that her husband should provide for her, should try to elevate her status. And everyone has different roles and rights. What we have to pay attention to and understand is that when tomorrow you go into your grave, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Nakir and Munkir, will not be asking you about your rights. You don't enter into the barzakh world, into that intermediary world before the day of judgment, and the angels come and ask you, how did it go over there? How did they treat you? Were people nice to you? Was everyone very good to you? Did people treat you nicely? Were they kind to you? Did they give you gifts? Did people invite you? These are not the questions that you will be asked. You understand? Haqqun nas, even though this is your right, it is not your right that you will be asked about in the grave. It is the right of others that you observed, that you abided by, you adhered to, that you'll be asked about. So, in other words, you're going to be asked about your responsibilities, not your rights. You're going to be asked about how you talk to people, not how people talk to you. How you treated the property of the property. Right? So this is why the Prophet is emphasizing, listen, don't leave this world and have unresolved issues when it comes to dealing with others. Make sure you take care of your haqqun nas. When is the time to do that? The time that you are here. Now is the time. There's some, you recited in Dua Kamel tonight. Dhalamtu nafsi, dhalamtu nafsi. I have done injustice to myself. I have oppressed myself. That means I have committed a sin. I have done a wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ordained that I should make prayer and I skipped out on my prayer, or I ignored it. Allah ordained that I should pay my khums and I decided that I don't think that that's important right now and I'm not going to pay it. Allah ordained that if I have the amount of financially I'm able, I have the financial capability, then I should make Hajj. And Hajj was happening. I had the ability and I just said, you know what, I'm saving this money for a different reason, for a rainy day or something like that. Those are injustices where I oppressed myself. That is dhalamtu nafsi. I had opportunity to eat something that's halal and I chose to eat something haram. I could have, these are injustices that a person does where they're really a transgression against God and they are a form of oppression. We shouldn't think about zulm only as, what Yazid did. We shouldn't think about zulm only in the context of what's happening to Muslims around the world. What's happening to oppressed people in America. We have to understand that the reality of zulm, the reality of oppression and injustice can be something that even we can do to ourselves. But Allah is so merciful, right? Almost every surah of the Quran, Allah reminds us, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Okay. But what we have to understand is that even with so much divine grace and mercy, so much compassion that comes from Allah, so much forgiveness that He has granted who seeks forgiveness from Him. Still, with all of that, we have to understand that if my injustice was something else, then when I'm seeking forgiveness, it's not my prayer mat. I fast or I give some sadaqah. I ask Allah for forgiveness. I weep tears of true nadama and true regret, and inshallah Allah forgives. No, when I do injustice to someone else, when I take away the haqq nas of my brother or sister in Islam or in humanity, then a different level of responsibility comes upon me. Property, but inshallah, forgive me and I live my life. Is it that simple? When it comes to haqqun nas, why the Prophet of Allah is emphasizing is because the forgiveness that we need from Allah comes after we seek forgiveness from the person we have done injustice to. This is where that tradition comes from, where people are going to Hajj, for example, where people are going ziyarah, and they come and they say, please forgive me, halal kunid, forgive me if I've done anything wrong, forgive my mistakes if I did a transgression against you. They're trying to purify themselves in this way and get that true forgiveness from Allah. The Prophet of Allah emphasized this haqqun nas. Another thing that is mentioned is that in the last days of the Prophet, he would visit Baqi a lot. He would go to Baqi a lot and visit all of the martyrs, some of his companions who were buried there. I want to emphasize how important ziyarah is, this visitation, but I want to emphasize that it is not limited to, I went to Mashhad, I went to Sham, I went to Karbala, Najaf, and I did ziyarah. There's more to it than that. What is the reality of ziyarah? The reality of this visitation is that when mu'mineen visit one another, that is a form of visitation. That is a form of ziyarah itself. When you visit the shrines, that is also a form of ziyarah. And we have to give a lot of importance for Muslims living in this context, in the Western world, for Muslims who are living surrounded in Darul Kufr, surrounded by things which are against Islam. We have to be vigilant in doing ziyarah with other believers and doing visitation amongst the believers. And I'm not talking about, I have my close circle of my handful of buddies, we hang out together, we do things together. I'm talking about the establishment of relationships which warrant visitation, creating those relationships. I agree with the idea of what Dr. Hart says about how the Prophet established basically, I'm paraphrasing, but a sense of community. That is one of the most major achievements, a system really which allows community. That is what Islam is. In community building, there's a foundational piece. That foundation is ukhuwah and brotherhood. One of those components of brotherhood is ziyarah. When mu'mineen visit one another, visit each other in their homes, there's specific hadith to that. There's hadith about the person who does man zara akhahu fillah walillah. The person who does ziyarat of their brother for the sake of God, in God and for God. There's a deep meaning in this. On the day of judgment, يَخْتِرُ بَيْنَ قَبَاطِيَ مِن نُور, that from his clothing there will be light hanging from his clothing. وَلَا يَمُرُّ بِشَيْءٍ إِلَّا أَضَاءَ لَهُ. And in every step that he takes, it will illuminate. Every step, things become illuminated. Where he places, where he steps, it becomes illuminated. This level of having this this light upon you, where you're stepping, and every step that you make, there's this reality is for the person who did what they did, ziyarah believers. So because ukhuwah, because brotherhood is not a just a material relationship, it's a spiritual bond. Because of that, that bond is not broken by leaving this world even. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam in his last days, when it says that he would do ziyarat of those who had passed away a lot, when he will go to Baqi a lot, that was because that bond of ukhuwah did not end when this person even left this world. What believers have is a spiritual bond that transcends even these those superficial aspects of life. The last thing that we'll mention tonight is that the also emphasized prayer. And even though it mentions that he was severely sick, that he did not abandon his jama'at prayers. We have an importance of prayer on an individual level. One of the teachers, Ayatollah Hadavi, he was asked about the late Ayatollah Muhammad Taqi Bahjat, this great mystic scholar and arif, and they were asking him about if he had witnessed some of the karamat or about spirituality. And one of the things that he emphasized is that no one reached anywhere without prayer. So this idea that it is mi'rajul mu'min, it's the that spiritual ascension of a believer, that's very real. Obviously, that is prayer done right. not prayer where my focus is elsewhere. The teachers of akhlaq and spirituality advise to, when you're trying to get to that level of understanding, that the mi'raj of prayer, and that being that kind of spiritual ascension, learn to focus on certain aspects. Pay attention and be intentional in your awareness of your kalamat, of the words that you are saying. Every Bismillah Rahman Rahim, every Subhanallah, every dhikr, every remembrance. Have an awareness of that. Allahu Akbar. At this moment, God is greater than anything. He always is. Make that your reality. And then, and also your harakat, your movements in prayer. Consider and reflect on when you take your head. You know, when they say someone holds their head high, what does that mean? It means that they are proud. But you take your pride and you become humble because you genuflect before God. You go into ruku, you bow your head. You put your forehead to the earth. And that process of, even going into sajda and coming back up and making the two sajdas, we have the hadith that talks about how that's the creation from the earth, coming into this world, going back into the earth when we leave this world. And on Yawma Yub'athun, on the day of resurrection, when we are raised out of the grave, coming out of the grave, that sajda, that's some. So there's this idea of what this prayer is for an individual. And there's also an idea of how important the communal and congregational worship is. What the congregational worship is the community building. It is bringing together people, right? It's an invitation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If so-and-so has a gathering, he invites maybe some of his friends. This person has a gathering, they invite some of their friends, a couple of families maybe. But at the table of Allah, at the sufra of Allah, when that invitation to prayer exists, it's open to every single person. There's a famous Hindu scholar or politician, and she talks about how prayer is, in Islam, is so beautiful, where the rich and the poor, the pauper, the prince, the king, or the most poor person in the world, if they are making salah, they stand together. At the sufra of Allah, they can stand at the same place. There's no injunction where this person has some preference over the other, where all people are created, that concept of being created equal, or the meritocracy in its real sense, in terms of taqwa being the thing which grants a person virtue, and piety being the thing that grants anyone any type of status. All of that becomes a reality in the prayer. And so even in illness, the Prophet did not want to abandon congregational prayer. We have this idea sometimes that about what a community looks like. I hear a lot of people, oftentimes they ask me, what's a good community? Is this place good? Is that place good? What about this city? I heard good things. That place, the weather is good. I heard this place has a big center. I heard this place has an even bigger center. I heard that center has a pool. Well, all kinds of different things, where people gauge whether or not they think that a community is quote unquote good. And there's a reality, and we can take this lesson from the life of the Prophet as well. Community that is good is the one that you build. You have to build the community that you want to see. This is the one. But the community is not in the four walls of a center. The reality of community is that it is in the hearts of the mu'mineen. It is in the hearts of the believers. Those hearts are connected with that spiritual bond. That is a place where there's community. You can walk into a big center that's huge and feel absolutely absent. You could even feel unwelcome. You could walk into a little hole in the wall place and feel that this is the homeliest place. Feel that you're most welcome because of the way people treated you. The community, and I would advise any place that wants to be building, before you emphasize and put all of your energy only into fundraising for a building, put so much energy into how are the hearts connected amongst the mu'mineen. Are there groups of people who don't talk to each other? Are there some who are affluent who are distant from those who are not? Are there people who have some status who are disconnected from others? Are there people without the spiritual bond and connection? Focus on that. That is what the real reality of what a community is. That is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam built. And what he built is what Imam Hussayn alayhi salam gave his life to continue to uphold. The same way that the Prophet of Allah was aware that his days were coming to an end in this world, when he looked at Imam Hussayn alayhi salam, he was aware of how he would tragically be betrayed by the people of this ummah. Right? The people whose commitment and whose sense of community was only on the tongue, or wasn't even on the tongue, who called themselves Muslim, the one who submits, but they only submitted to their own desires and they fought against Abu Abdullah. I hope that as we were reflecting on the day of Ashura and as we were reflecting on Arba'een and reflecting on the tragic event of Karbala, the tears that were shed, the tears that Rasulullah shed for Imam Hussayn when he was just a child. When we reflect on that betrayal from the Ummah, and it's really the betrayal of a child against their father, because Rasulullah is the father of this ummah. It's mentioned in some hadith. Imam Sajjad alayhi salam says that your father is your root, the source of all the good that we have, all that we benefit from this religion is from that messenger who was a rahmah. And so when they transgress against Imam Hussayn alayhi salam, they transgress against Rasulullah. They transgress against God. And while it's very easy to see the zalimeen in the tragedy of Karbala. And it's easy to see who was the zalim in Sham. We have to reflect and remember that if we are following Rasulullah and at the same time doing dhulm, dhalamtu nafsi, against ourselves and committing sin, then we are also transgressing against Rasulullah and against God Himself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the tawfiq, the success to comprehend and be aware of the straight path and to walk and live in this world on the straight path and to be raised up as part of the ummah of Rasulullah and to receive the shafa'ah of Imam Hussayn alayhi salam, the Ahlul Bayt, and Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Wassalamu alaykum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. The luminous moon lighting the way, the rising sun that brightens the day. Heaven without you would be in flames. You're the heaven in Karbala. The luminous moon lighting the way, the rising sun that brightens the day. Heaven without you would be in flames. You're the heaven in Karbala. Your visitors offer you their hands. Enemies will never understand. How can the water lose to the sand? How can the thirst win in Karbala? Why heaven is open, Ya Hussayn? Why angels descending, Ya Hussayn? Why they are residing in Karbala? Why heaven is open, Ya Hussayn? Why angels descending, Ya Hussayn? Why they are residing in Karbala? From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. The hand of God that nurtures the young, speaking for Allah, you were the tongue, separating His rights from the wrong, elevated in Karbala. The hand of God that nurtures the young, speaking for Allah, you were the tongue, separating His rights from the wrong, elevated in Karbala. The ship that sails swiftly through the waves, and whoever boards your ship is safe, immune from the punishment of the grave. Whoever mourned you in Karbala, when will we meet again, Ya Hussayn? When under your dome will I grieve again? From Najaf will I walk to Karbala? When will we meet again, Ya Hussayn? When under your dome will I grieve again? From Najaf will I walk to Karbala? From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, 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 I left my heart in Karbala. From Karbala, Karbala, Karbala to Karbala, Karbala, Karbala. I left my heart in Karbala. I left my heart in Karbala. I left my heart in Karbala. It's in Karbala. Ya Hussayn, 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 Ya Hussayn.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أزور سيدي ومولاي أبا عبد الله الحسين صلوات الله وسلامه عليه، صالة عن نفسي ونيابة عن والدي ووالد والدي وأخواني المؤمنين والمؤمنات، لا سيما من قلدنا الدعاء والزيارة طاعة قربة إلى الله تعالى. أسأل الله الجاه. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. السلام عليك يا وارث آدم صفوة الله. السلام عليك يا وارث نوح النبي الله. السلام عليك يا وارث إبراهيم خليل الله. السلام عليك يا وارث موسى كليم الله. السلام عليك يا وارث عيسى روح الله. السلام عليك يا وارث محمد حبيب الله. السلام عليك يا وارث أمير المؤمنين ولي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن محمد المصطفى. السلام عليك يا ابن علي المرتضى. السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا ابن خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا ثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور. أشهد أنك قد أقمت الصلاة وآتيت الزكاة وأمرت بالمعروف ونهيت عن المنكر وأطعت الله ورسوله حتى أتاك اليقين. فلعن الله أمة قتلت، ولعن الله أمة ظلمت، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. يا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله، أشهد أنك كنت نورا في الأصلاب الشامخة والأرحام المطهرة، لم تنجسك الجاهلية بأنجاسها ولم تلبسك من مدلهمات ثيابها. وأشهد أنك من دعائم الدين وأركان المؤمنين. وأشهد أنك الإمام البر التقي الرضي الزكي الهادي المهدي. وأشهد أن الأئمة من ولدك كلمة التقوى وأعلام الهدى والعروة الوثقى والحجة على أهل الدنيا. وأشهد الله وملائكته وأنبياءه ورسله أني بكم مؤمن وبإيابكم موقن، بشرائع ديني وخواتيم عملي، وقلبي لقلبكم سل وأمري لأمركم متبع. صلوات الله عليكم وعلى أرواحكم وعلى أجسادكم وعلى أجسامكم وعلى شاهدكم وعلى غائبكم وعلى ظاهركم وعلى باطنكم. زيارة علي بن الحسين عليهما السلام. السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله. السلام عليك يا ابن نبي الله. السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن الحسين الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها الشهيد وابن الشهيد. السلام عليك أيها المظلوم وابن المظلوم. لعن الله أمة قتلت، ولعن الله أمة ظلمت، ولعن الله أمة سمعت بذلك فرضيت به. زيارة الأوصياء سلام الله عليهم أجمعين، الشهداء السعداء شهداء كربلاء. السلام عليكم يا أولياء الله وأحباءه. السلام عليكم يا أصفياء الله وأوداءه. السلام عليكم يا أنصار دين الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار رسول الله. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي محمد الحسن بن علي الولي الناصح. السلام عليكم يا أنصار أبي عبد الله الحسين. بأبي أنتم وأمي طبتم مطابة الأرض التي أنتم فيها دفنتم وفزتم فوزا عظيما، فيا ليتني كنت معكم فأفوز معكم. زيارة العباس ابن علي سلام الله عليهم أجمعين. السلام عليك يا أبا الفضل العباس بن أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا ابن سيد الوصيين. السلام عليك يا ابن أول القوم إسلاما وأقدمهم إيمانا وأقومهم بدين الله وأحوطهم على الإسلام. أشهد لقد نصحت لله ولرسوله ولأخيك، فنعم الأخ المواسي لأخيه. فلعن الله أمة قتلتك، ولعن الله أمة ظلمتك، ولعن الله أمة استحلت منك المحارم وانتهكت في قتلك حرمة الإسلام. فنعم الصابر المجاهد المحامي الناصر والأخ الدافع عن أخيه المجيب إلى طاعة ربه الراغب فيما زهد فيه غيره من الثواب الجزيل والثناء الجميل. فألحقك الله بدرجة آبائك في دار النعيم. آمين رب العالمين. الصلاة والسلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى جدك وأبيك، وعلى أمك وأخيك، وعلى 9 المعصومين من بنيك، لا سيما مولانا صاحب العصر والزمان عجل الله فرجه الشريف، وجعلنا من أعوانه وأنصاره والمستشهدين بين يديه في جملة أوليائه برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وصلى اللهم على محمد وآل محمد طيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.